Guys, 2025 is looking pretty dire, but I'm here to tell you why there's hope for 2026. And I'm not the only one. Standard Chartered, which is a big bank, I don't know if they're playing us or something. They could just be playing us, honestly. They say the 19 billion market crash paves the way for Bitcoin to rise to 200K now. That doesn't make much sense to me, but it makes sense to them somehow. So they see this as a buying opportunity. Of course, they could just be telling us this because they want to use us as exit liquidity. And you know that big banks will play us like this. This is supposed to be an exclusive interview. You can listen to it on Cointelegraph. But basically, they still think that Bitcoin will reach 200,000 by the end of the year. Of course, we've only got about 2 months left. That means it would have to rise about 45,000 per month, which is somewhat unlikely. So his official forecast is still 200,000 by the end of the year. So we can always point and laugh at him if it doesn't reach 200,000 by the end of the year. Despite the Trump noise around tariffs, Kendrick said he still sees a price rise well north of 150. Now, with the economic uncertainty, I'm not really sure where that's actually going to come from. So the thing is, I don't agree with Standard Chartered. I'm looking more towards next year. But the whole thing with him is he thinks it's going to rally off the back of ETFs and gold price. Well, Bitcoin ETFs been there for a while now, so that's nothing new. We got altcoin ETFs, but we don't know when we're going to get them because the government's actually shut down. In terms of the gold price, gold doesn't seem to have too much of an effect on Bitcoin. The problem with gold is that it's not really that related to crypto. I mean, gold's down today as well, and Bitcoin's still down. When gold's up, Bitcoin's a lot of times still down. So we do have the rate cuts and everything, but mostly I think the reason that we could actually get a pump is because of the M2 boom. And they're saying this is going to be like the COVID-19 comparisons. Remember, we had that COVID crash, and then Bitcoin soared afterwards. So they're looking like Bitcoin to 6x in 2026. So I don't actually believe it's going to go to 500,000 because they're thinking, oh, it's going to repeat the 2020 expansion. But remember, at that time, Bitcoin was still very, very, very low, and we're already at over 100,000. So unlikely, and it's going to take a lot more money to get to 500,000. But if M2 follows true, and Bitcoin does follow M2 pretty closely, I would say that something along the lines of 200,000 next year is not out of the question. 250, pushing it a bit definitely, but definitely 200. The price increased 6 times after worldwide COVID-19 money printing spree. That was a lot of printing, and that printing actually happened. Obviously, interest rates went to zero, and interest rates are not going to zero now, so that's a big difference. But the printing spree essentially happened because everyone was out of a job at COVID, and the government needed to print money to basically give to people that didn't have jobs during COVID. The job market is getting weaker, but it's not nearly that bad. It's not like everything just shut down and everyone went home. So that amount of printing is somewhat unlikely. I do think there is going to be some printing before the midterms because he needs to buy votes. So the latest M2 jump comes as central banks cut interest rates while inflation lingers. So inflation is still there, obviously not as bad as COVID, but they are cutting rates. Not just the US, but countries all over the world. So the analysis comes from on-ramp Bitcoin co-founder Jesse Myers, and he confirms the biggest M2 supply jump since the COVID-19 pandemic began. So he's definitely looking at 2026. I mean, we're all hopium. I mean, we're all looking for narratives because as each narrative fails, we have to come up with a new one to keep the hope up. But the M2 thing is actually very real, and Bitcoin does actually follow M2 at least more than other signals. It's not direct one-to-one, and there's definitely different circumstances this way around, but what happened in 2020 does give us some hope. So the money printer hasn't run this hot since COVID. Global M2 money supply now, 137 trillion, was just 129 trillion 6 months ago. So we did increase by about 8 trillion. Gold has rallied in response. Bitcoin, it seems to be lagging just as it did in 2020. So he's looking at that. He's not really looking at the 4-year cycle anymore. It seems like he's thrown that out the window, and it seems like a lot of people have thrown the 4-year cycle out the window. I'm going to wait 2 more months before I throw the 4-year cycle out of the window, but the 4-year cycle might have just died. If you look at the global if you actually look at the global M2 money supply chart, you look at 2020, 2021, you see it did actually go up after 2017. And that's like, that's when we had the first Bitcoin run. We had a 2021 run, 2021 run, that's that. And then we haven't really had too much M2 money supply, but now it's going up again. If it keeps going up for a couple more months, we might get that big supply run. We might get that big run in 2026. And you can see like each of the Bitcoin runs basically happened at least a couple of months, if not like a year into this big M2 money rise. You look at 2017, but we didn't really start at the beginning of 2017. It was basically end of 2018 and 2017 and 2018. 2021, same thing here. We didn't really start in 2020. Like we basically started at the end of 2020 and beginning of 2021. So, give it like 2 or 3 more months, and then we should actually escalate because M2 is going up like crazy. The last 2 years since 2021, the M2 money supply has actually stayed stable, but now it is going up precipitously again. And that is a good news for cryptocurrency. Obviously, more liquidity means more money into assets. So this graph is pretty linear, 70, 80, 90, 100, 110, 120. You can see that we've risen from 120, 125 or so to almost 140. So there's a 6.2% M2 increase since March this year, leaves some way to go before reaching the 2020 levels. Then we did actually increase by 21% by the end of the year. So the increase, I think the slope is just about as severe as 2021. And 2017 had a big slope too, but on a shorter timeline. But of course, 2017 crypto was really low, didn't require that much money to actually go up. And there's a lot of leverage traders right now that will actually take advantage of this. But ultimately, M2 money supply is a big marker, and it hasn't been it hasn't had this slope for long enough to really trigger a run. But if it keeps going for the next 6 months, definitely I think it will actually trigger a run. Now, like I said, not a 6x rally because it just takes a lot more money, but even a 2x rally or a 2.5x rally, especially for altcoins, would be very, very welcome. So responding asset manager Lawrence Leopard still predicted that the trend would have a classic knock-on effect in Bitcoin. I think it probably, especially with the lowering of rates, it'll definitely have a knock-on effect for all of crypto. So discussing the idea, Leopard described M2 as the real rate of inflation, dismissing central bank inflation targets such as the U.S. Reserve's 2% goal. I mean, this is not just for the United States, though. This is for the world, more or less. So, you won't see this kind of inflation in the U.S., but you will see this kind of inflation worldwide. And obviously that includes a lot of other countries. They all demand the US dollar. The more dollars there are in circulation, the more, not just dollars, the more money there is in circulation for the world, the better these risk assets become, because some people will definitely put in those risk assets, especially as the rates come down. So the two requirements are this keeps going up for another 6 months or so, and we need the rates to come down worldwide. Now, many of the countries have already cut rates multiple times. The U.S. is lagging a little bit behind in that, but that really doesn't matter all that much because Jerome Powell is finally cutting. I expect to cut next week, and I expect cuts next year when Trump guys come in. So that's why I'm saying look forward to June or so of next year. I know another 6 months is going to be very harsh for people, but I definitely believe that if you can last it out and grind it out there, there will definitely be rewards. So a repeat of 2020 with the M2 is definitely possible. The ROI won't be quite the same because it takes a lot more money now to pump Bitcoin up. Bitcoin being at 100,000 instead of 20,000. So, but I do think there is enough M2 if the chart keeps going up to get us up to maybe 200,000, and I think that will definitely cause the altcoins to massively boom. And the M2 does keep hitting all-time highs. If you look at the graph here, we've had a little bit of a stint the last couple of weeks. Well, not the last couple of weeks, but we had this little dip here actually in 2023, but now we're going back up. And finally, you know, like the last couple of weeks, we did reach an M2 high at this point. I think after the 2021 bull run, the M2 did actually come down because rates rose all over the world. But now we're back to that high, and it looks like we're continually going up. So very, very good news with the world money supply. And it's not just the United States, although the US dollar does control a lot of the money flow. So that's some good news for you. And M2 is one of the signals that Bitcoin follows more than any of the others. And that's why we're really looking into 2026, because it's not going to happen soon enough in 2025. So hold on. I wouldn't like go all in on anything, but hold on. Don't sell everything and wait for this to play out. That's the news for today. Let me know what you think. Like and subscribe. Hit that bell notifications button. Thank you and have a nice day.